Good morning, everybody, and I would like to begin today by welcoming those members of the public or press who have joined us today, either in person or watching via the live stream, to this meeting of the Environment and Green Investment Committee in Alconbury. The Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. May I ask, though, that everyone present turn their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. There is no fire alarm test scheduled for today, so if the alarm sounds, please leave by the nearest marked fire exit and assemble in the car park. The closest fire escape is through the middle doors on my left. The first item on our agenda today is apologies for absence and declarations of interest. So I'm going to ask the Democratic Services Officer to report any apologies for absence.
Thank you. We have received apologies from Councillor Count, with Councillor Goldsack substituting, as well as apologies from Councillors Ferguson and Tierney.
Thank you very much indeed. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest, please? Councillor Bradnam.
I'm the local member for Waterbeach Division, and so the item on the household recycling centre is in my division, but I don't think I've taken part in any other discussions than we as a committee have had as briefings. So I don't think I've got an interest, is what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Councillor Bradnam. Item 2 then, we are being asked to approve the minutes for the meetings held on the 3rd October 2024 as a correct record. May I ask whether any member disagrees with the accuracy of the minutes? I'm not seeing any disagreement, so we will take that as agreed unanimously. And then attached to that, to the minutes is an action log. So we've agreed the minutes. We're now moving on to the action log. Do officers have any updates on the action log?
Yes, one
Jenna.
update. Thank you. In relation to Action 214D, Climate Change and Environment Strategy Progress Report and Annual Carbon Footprint 2023-24, an update was circulated to members stating that Council has representation on the Anglian Great Ouse and Anglian Northern Regional Flood and Coastal Committees, which include representation from neighbouring counties serving the purpose of communicating flood and coastal erosion risks. The update also stated that drought planning is the responsibility of water companies and regional planning at the Water Resources East level.
Thank you very much. Is that absolutely clear to everybody? Good. Delighted to hear it. Do members have any questions on the action log? Not seeing any, so we are asked to note the action log, which I think we have now done. We have received no petitions or public questions under item 3, so I'm going to move us on to item 4, which is the Community Energy Action Plan. This is a key decision and will be presented by Chris Parkin, our Community Energy Manager, with Cheryl French in support. Thank you.
Thank you. So the report relates to an action plan to support community energy in Cambridgeshire, and it provides a summary of responses to a stakeholder engagement exercise on a draft version of the action plan. The report also recommends that Council adopts the action plan, including all 11 actions that were included in the consultation, but with a few clarifications and additional details in response to the consultation responses. The stakeholder engagement exercise ran from the 8th of July up until the 16th of September. We received 140 responses, which was a very good response rate for this type of exercise. And 82% of responses supported the Council adopting an action plan to support community energy in Cambridgeshire. 14% of responses were opposed to the Council adopting an action plan. Looking at the individual 11 actions that were included in the consultation draft, There was majority support for all of those. The lowest level of support was 72% and the highest level 85%. And levels of opposition for individual actions ranged from 11% to 20%. Notably, East Cambridgeshire District Council officers were not supportive of adoption of the action plan, so they're one of the 14% in amongst the 14%. In terms of the content of the action plan, the actions cover 3 broad areas: community energy, domestic renewables and energy efficiency, and education and awareness raising. It's important to be clear that by community energy, we mean energy generation assets that are developed, owned and operated by communities themselves. On that theme, the community energy theme, the action plan included 6 actions to support development of such projects, and they were facilitating the setup of a county-wide community energy cooperative to support communities with developing their projects. And the council's role in that is likely to be holding a virtual event to discuss what's involved in becoming a board member for that cooperative, and advertising and approaching stakeholders to volunteer for board roles. The second action in this area was match funding for project feasibility and development studies. The third action was employing a community development officer to support community groups with their projects. Fourth action, guidance and advice, including route maps, providing a concise summary of how to develop typical types of projects, but referring to external sources for more detail on best practice. Fifth action was brokering customer relationships, so introducing community energy groups with, for example, local schools or municipal building operators that could host rooftop solar PV and act as a customer for electricity generated from rooftop solar developed and installed and owned by community energy groups. And the sixth action on the community energy topic was a council search for suitable sites for community energy projects, making use of the UK Power Network's Your Local Net Zero tool that's being used for the local area energy plan. Okay, sorry. The action plan also included 4 actions on domestic energy efficiency, which were around promoting grant uptake, raising awareness of innovative energy tariffs, and supporting communities with neighbourhood renewable retrofit schemes, and some work to promote uptake of grants among private landlords. We'll work with the Cambridgeshire Energy Retrofit Partnership on all of those actions to ensure consistency of messaging with their work. And the final action in the action plan was an education and awareness raising action. And we'll work with Cambridgeshire Carbon Footprint and Cambridgeshire Retrofit Hub, who've both offered to support us in delivering that activity, subject to committee approving of the action plan, of course. Final couple of points I wanted to note, the effectiveness of these actions will be monitored in terms of the carbon savings delivered, the bill savings delivered, grants secured, and the number of residents engaged, and the number and capacity of projects brought forward, so that we can keep an eye on value for money of the activity. And finally, in terms of budget, the budget for this is as agreed in full council in February this year. It's £338,000 revenue budget over 2 years from the Just Transition Fund. That is it for my introduction. Very happy to try and answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Has anybody got any questions for Chris on this report? Councillor Wood.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just got the one. I've read through the report and with great interest. You mentioned in here that there is, for domestic and community, there are majorly solar and wind as far as generation of electricity is concerned. And also there's mention of innovative tariffs provided by energy companies. Apart from a couple of comments from the respondents, I didn't see any mention of battery storage, which is something that I know that our local parishes are looking at the moment, as well as certain domestic uses, where cheap energy can be stored for later on in the day. Is there any reason why that wasn't specifically included? That's all I need to ask, really. Thank you.
No specific reason why that wasn't included. I mean, it would fall within the work that would be done on domestic energy efficiency. Whether or not there's value in battery energy storage depends very much on the use case of the building. So if you've got lots of electricity demand during the day, for example, something like a school, there's usually very little value in having battery energy storage coupled with solar PV. But if you've got a building where your use is primarily off peak, then it can potentially be a sensible option. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Hathorn.
Thank you. Firstly, in regards to the responses to the consultation, I found it quite difficult to read them because it was in prose rather than a table. Might it be possible to look at the way these things are presented in the future? The questions in regard to the content are, in terms of the equality assessment and thinking in that manner, community energy projects are really exciting, but I think one of the things that often characterises more deprived areas is the lack of capacity within the community potentially for engaging in quite complicated projects. So are we looking at a situation where if you have one very, very motivated person, they're going to be able to work, they're going to have sufficient support to be able to get a long way in terms of delivering something? That's the first question. The second question is, in regards to the heat network zoning, I read the word enforcement amongst other words. And obviously, I feel that heat network zoning could become quite controversial in the future. So that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing it, but it does mean we need to be sensitive to it. And how are we developing that conversation so that people understand the benefits? Because if you enforce without anyone understanding the benefits, I know this is in the future, but this seems to be a risk for the heat network zoning. Thank you.
Several questions there. On the table versus prose, there are tables with the numerical responses to each question. We did feel it would be helpful to allow prose responses to provide a little bit more detail, to provide the background as to why people had indicated a particular response. That turned out to be the responses to that were quite varied, which is why there's quite a lot of text in Appendix B explaining the background. Certainly, we can look on future exercises to have more questions with options to answer and less text in the response. In terms of deprived areas and capacity to take forward projects, in part, that's one of the things that the Community Energy Co-op is intended to do. It's meant to centralise expertise in the county so that can support communities that don't have a lot of capacity or expertise, but do want to take forward projects. I think in terms of there being one motivated individual in a community, I think you're always going to need more than that because you need to demonstrate community interests and community demand. Certainly the co-op would be facilitating communities that might not have the skills or a huge amount of capacity. There were interesting comments in response to the education and awareness raising action around making sure that less affluent communities weren't left behind. And I think there we'd look to tailor some of the education and awareness raising events specifically to opportunities that are easier for less affluent communities to engage in. And there are obviously things like the Warm Homes Grant that are very much, Warm Homes Local Grant, that's very much focused on less affluent homeowners. So that's an opportunity to make them aware of those kind of opportunities. But also cheaper energy tariffs for people who've got smart meters and are able to shift demand. And also there are some commercial operators like Octopus who will offer lower energy tariffs to communities that host wind turbines. And that sort of offer isn't one that doesn't require capital investment from a community. So it's something that people may want to be aware of and consider whether it's something they'd like to sign up for. Heat network zoning, I haven't really got a great deal to say about that. It is, as you say, very early days. The background to that is there was a government consultation that the government's planning on taking forward development of heat network zones, and then looking for local authorities to have a role in delivering on those heat network zones. So advertising opportunities to developers, but also taking enforcement responsibility where certain criteria weren't met, which I think was sort of around connecting, I think it was largely non-commercial, non-domestic properties to networks. But really, I think all I can say on that at the moment is very much watch this space. It was a consultation under the previous government. Haven't seen a consultation response yet. We'll have to see how it develops.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make sure that in this process we don't forget and promote insulation before, not before solar, local generation, but there's no point in generating loads of electricity if your house is leaking heat. So I can see you've got your point 7, promote uptake of domestic energy efficiency grants. And are we promoting that, insulating your house as the very first thing to be done?
Not necessarily. It really depends on individual circumstances. If you've got any generalization will be slightly dangerous, but generally speaking, if you've got a relatively modern building with cavity walls and loft insulation and cavity walls, but not uninsulated cavity walls and not 300 millimeters of loft insulation, yes, the first thing you should probably do is top up that insulation and insulate the cavity walls. However, I think we need to be a little bit careful. There's plenty of evidence that heat pumps, for example, are perfectly effective in heating properties that are not as thermally efficient as the best insulated properties. And there are lots of properties where it's either very difficult or very expensive to improve the thermal efficiency. So if you've got a solid wall property, you can easily be looking at over £10,000, several tens of £1,000s potentially to do solid wall insulation. That might never pay back in your tenure in the property. And it may be dissuasive of people installing a heat pump if they're told, well, actually, you should insulate first. So I think we do need to be a little bit careful. Absolutely, yes. We will be, we have been promoting insulation upgrades through the Action on Energy scheme and the Cambridgeshire Energy Retrofit Partnership, and we'll continue to do so. But we need to be a little bit careful that we don't say you mustn't do anything else until you've done that, because it's really not as straightforward as that.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Are there any more questions from anybody? Not seeing any raised hands, so I'll move on to the debate. Does anybody wish to debate this report and its recommendations? Councillor Coutts.
Not sure if it's debate. I just wanted to make a couple of comments, really. I was very impressed by this report. The recommendations seem to be well argued, balanced, and I was a little surprised that there'd been any opposition at all. I mean, it's very nice to see a large amount of support, but so much this seemed to me to be self-evidently good ideas that I just like to praise it, really. Also, just to throw in a couple of examples related to that, first to that last comment, which was on air source heat pumps in uninsulated buildings. We have in Ely installed an air source heat pump array in a medieval church, which seems to be doing a perfectly good job, even though it's impossible to have modern standards of insulation there. And the other is specifically on the case of local energy projects. I'm a great fan of the Highlands of Scotland, and I had a lovely week spent in a very remote little village of Inveree, which could only be accessed either on foot or by boat. I went in by boat. They have 2 sets of local energy projects there, including their own hydro scheme, and they're very, very proud of it indeed. So local energy projects, when they work well, are clearly such a good thing. But I do recognise from this report the difficulties in some circumstances in making them, enabling communities to do this. And so the idea of an energy cooperative of this nature to support it seems such a good idea to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coots. I think my favourite example that I've encountered is on the floating Uros Islands in Peru, which are made of reeds lashed together. We visited one of those, and there was indeed a solar panel on the floating reed bed Uros Islands. So real props to local communities who decide to take matters into their own hands. Fantastic. Is there any other debate on this report? I agree, it is absolutely excellent, and I would have expected nothing less from Chris. So I'm really pleased to see this coming to us. It's something I feel very strongly about, something we've already got some good examples of in this county, and I hope to see much more of. So I'm going to put the matter to the vote now. The first recommendation is to note the responses and the inclusion and conclusions of the consultation, which we have done. I have to say I'm disappointed to see the response of East Cambridge to this, and I hope that they will come on board and really support what we're trying to do here. But the one on which we're required a vote is to agree to the adoption of the Council Community Energy Action Plan as set out in Appendix C to this report. Can I see those in favour of the recommendations, please? And can I see those against? I don't think there are any. I think that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members. Before we leave this item and move on, I need to draw to this meeting's attention that this is the last meeting for both Chris and Cheryl. Both are moving on. And I want to say a few words about each of them. Cheryl, I have been impressed by for a very, very long time. I think she is exceptional. I think she has amazing leadership qualities. I've been in awe of the breadth and depth of her knowledge of the subject that she has been so very involved with here for such a long time. And I want to say to Cheryl, all the very best to you for your future. Thank you for everything that you have done here, and that is much appreciated, and our good wishes go with you. Chris, the report we've just considered is a typical example of your conscientiousness, your knowledge, your attention to detail, your understanding of the subject, and ability to communicate sometimes quite complex matters very clearly and straightforwardly. That again has been to our huge benefit, and as we will miss Cheryl, we will also miss you terribly. Very good fortune in your next venture, and I hope everything goes well for you. So thank you very much indeed, both. Okay, thank you. I'd like to move on to the next item, if I may please, which is the Milton Household Recycling Centre. Now, I need to remind members that Appendix 2 to this report is exempt, and if you wish to discuss or question it, we will need to move into confidential session. Are members likely to want to discuss anything in the exempt appendix? I'm taking that as a no. I'm not seeing any indication that anybody wishes to do so. So I am hoping that we can carry this through in public without having to go into confidential session. If you wish to go into confidential session, I need to say that the recording will have to stop. And if members of the public or the press are viewing, if ever we go into confidential session, you will need to sign out and revisit the page with the live streams on, because it will be a separate live stream. So moving on, and very much in the hope that we can do all of this in public, the Milton Household Recycling Centre development is a key decision and will be presented by Andrew Smith, Head of Waste Management. Thank you, Andrew.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. The Milton HRC redevelopment project. Members should have received the report pack, which includes a confidential item already talked about at Appendix 2. In summary, this report gives an update on the Milton Household Recycling Centre redevelopment project, which started in 2020, when outline designs for the site were presented to the Environment and Sustainability Committee, the relevant service committee at that time, and delegations sought to progress the planning application for the site redevelopment. The report also includes details of the design and build construction tender exercise and bidders' tender costs, which show that the capital costs are currently estimated to be in line with the budget allocation, which also allows for a 10% contingency sum. This report also includes a risk register at Appendix 3, detailing the types of risks and their potential impact at this point in time after mitigation actions. This risk register is a live document and will be reviewed regularly with all the project partners during the project. Color coding in risks 3.3.2, 3.7.1 and 3.8.1 have now been changed to the correct color coding, that of red and amber respectively. Example of risks are changes in government and statutory regulations, which could have a high impact on the project, and fly tipping. CCC has already started discussions on how to communicate the site closure plan and alternative options available, and to work with the Greater Cambridge City Shared Services Enforcement Team to deter fly tipping activities. The risk matrix was reviewed and updated yesterday, 27th of November, and transferred to the project online web application, Power, the approved project management tool for Cambridgeshire County Council. The committee is being asked to agree the recommendations to allow the project to progress to the detailed design and then construction phases, including the award of the design and build contract to the selected contractor. The temporary closure of the Milton site and introduction of a booking system at the three nearest sites, Triplo, Wychford and Bluntisham, to manage displaced volumes of material currently taken to the Milton Household Recycling Centre, while the new site is constructed. In addition, and running in parallel, is the environmental permit application, which is required to operate the site. This will be an amendment to the existing site permit. Approval of the recommendations in the report will allow the council to deliver a new split-level site design, which aims to improve the safety environment for residents and for staff, remove the current need to close the site whilst exchanging waste containers, and increase the capacity of the site for use by the growing population in Cambridgeshire, the communities to the north of the city and wider Cambridgeshire residents. The report is asking that the committee is recommended to approve the preferred option to proceed with the construction of the new facility, delegate authority to the Executive Director, Place and Sustainability, in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Environment and Green Infrastructure Committee, to award and execute a contract for the successful design and build contractor, approve the temporary closure of Milton HRC and the introduction of a temporary booking system at the three nearest household recycling centres, Triplo, Wychford and Bluntisham, whilst the Milton HRC is temporarily closed. If approved, the construction phase is proposed to start in September, October 2025, with an estimated 42-week construction period. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Now, before I move on to questions, local members have been invited to comment on the report. So I know we've received one comment in writing, so I'm going to invite the Democratic Services Officer to read out that statement. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you, Chair. We've received a comment from Councillor Thompson as follows. As the County Councillor representing North Stowe, I wish to provide feedback on the proposed redevelopment of the Milton Household Recycling Centre and its relevance to our community. North Stowe is a growing and forward-thinking community, and the plans for Milton HRC offer significant benefits that align with our residents' needs and aspirations. The proposed reuse shop at the redevelopment site is of particularly exciting initiative. By allowing residents to access good quality pre-loved items at low or no cost, the shop supports sustainability goals while offering economic benefits, particularly for low-income households. This aligns with the ethos of sustainable North Stowe and North Stowe's status as a Surfers Against Sewage plastic-free community, reflecting our community's commitment to reducing waste and promoting sustainable practices. The improved design and increased capacity of the redeveloped facility will ensure it meets the current and future needs of Northstow's growing population. During the temporary closure, I urged the committee to ensure clear communication about alternative arrangements and implement efficient systems to manage demand at nearby HRCs. Efforts to deter fly tipping, such as proactive enforcement and education campaigns, will also be essential to maintaining environmental quality in the area. In conclusion, the redevelopment of Milton HRC represents a vital investment in waste management for Northstowe and beyond. Its sustainability goals and reuse initiatives align perfectly with Northstowe's values and aspirations, ensuring long-term benefits for our residents and businesses. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much indeed, Jenna. And I'm going to invite local members who are present here today to speak, and I think that is just Councillor Bradnam. So Councillor Bradnam, if in your role as a local member, if you could make any contribution you wish in that capacity.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as the officer has identified, the Milton site is the busiest of the 9 household recycling centres within Cambridgeshire, and it sits within a catchment that has a lot of population that use it very regularly. And we know when it was shut before, or when the management of it was managed by bookings, we know that that did work, but it was quite a difficult process to manage in terms of aspiration. People would turn up without bookings. So, but in the principle of it, I think it's an extremely good idea. It's one of the old design household recycling centres which requires people to trek up steps, and actually this 2-tier design is obviously a much better way of doing things. So I'm very happy that we do rebuild the centre, and I'm very glad we're doing it because I think it's a vital resource. During the closure, I'm wondering if we can offer any, I heard that we are liaising with South Cambs District Council, who are the collection authority during the period of closure. And I'd just like us to support that we give South Cambs as much support as we can during that time, because it's going to be very difficult. And I'm absolutely sure we will have an increase in fly tipping, and it's one of the risks on the register. So I'd like to maximise the support we give to South Cambs during that time. The one of the items that I've raised right the way through the planning process is that I am concerned about drainage, but I have been reassured that that will work. There's a lot of water that runs off Butt Lane and into the site. And of course, because it's perfect for this process, which is of course that it's a great big lump of galt clay underneath, means that the water doesn't drain anywhere else. So I'm just concerned that we have got drainage sorted out and we don't get any problems in the strip of woodland along the west side of Butt Lane. And finally, when the household recycling centre is up and running, what I realise is that, of course, with a reuse shop, it could actually quite badly impact on the very lively recycling and reuse facility that exists at Emmaus, just up the road. And I'm just wondering if we can, if we suddenly find we've got an enormous amount of income through that reuse shop, can we consider being charitably generous to Emmaus if their income from their reuse and recycling shop drops? And I'm just thinking that would be quite unfortunate for them, because they are providing homes for homeless people, and so they're entirely resourced by charitable donations. So I'm just wondering if we can just think in terms of the impact of this facility possibly taking lots of materials which are then sold on, which might then impact Emmaus. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've also been reminded by Councillor Hathorn that my geography has failed me totally, and that she is also a local member. Councillor Hathorn, would you like to say something in that capacity?
Yes, I'd just like to say yes, the plans look great and it's really exciting. And I'm sure the residents of my division will really look forward to being able to visit the new designed household recycling centre. What I will say is that the real tension point absolutely is the development in the period when it's closed. And what I haven't really seen in this paper is an outline of the communications plan. So can I request an action that members are kept informed of what that communications plan is so that we can feed in and request, additional support? I think it's important that particularly South Cambs District Council area, East Cambs and City area are all made very clear of the change in arrangements, both with Milton being closed and the booking system in the other locations. And also at the weekend, I bumped into a councillor from Royston and I realised the cross-border relationships as well. So Suffolk and Norfolk probably need to be involved in that conversation as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Hathorn. I'm going to ask Andrew and also Emma Fitch, who is also there with us to assist in answering questions, to come back on any of the issues that have been raised specifically by the local members.
Chair, can I go first?
Entirely a matter for you.
Picking up the point about Emmaus, at the moment, the materials that go into the household waste recycling centres belong to Thalia, the contractor. But there's no reason why we couldn't start discussions with Thalia and Emmaus to look at any impacts this might have and to see how between the three parties we can come to a solution which might encourage even more recycling and reuse of unwanted materials.
Great, thank you.
Onto the other point that was raised about the comms plan. Now that we have sight of what the construction activity and the timetable will be for the development of the site, we can now start to move the communications with all the respective parties forward and come up with a solution on how we're going to deal with promoting the site closure, the run up to the site closure and the site reopening.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Is there anything you wanted to add, Emma?
Yes, so just one thing was to make sure that it's clear that it's only the three nearest sites. So when we're looking at some of our sites that are very close to others, so cross-border issues, those won't have any booking systems being provided. So it's just to explain that, but certainly we can look at the comms, and as part of the comms, we'll be working through our recap partners as well to make sure that we're getting input from our district colleagues as well.
Thank you very much indeed. I will now go out to questions more generally. Councillor Gay first and then Councillor Goldsack.
I was just wondering whether you have a sense of how the Milton recycling is going to be distributed to the three alternative sites, because if it all piles up in one site, it could cause knock-on problems with fly tipping and such.
Thank you. In answer to that question, we can't categorically say exactly what tonnage will be displaced to what site. If I can give you an idea of tonnages that go through the respective sites at the moment, at Milton we have just over 9,000 tonnes. So on a pro rata basis, we're looking at probably 6,000 to 7,000 tonnes being displaced to alternative sites. Not necessarily the three that I mentioned. People might decide to go somewhere else or might decide to use other means to get rid of their unwanted materials. The Thriplow site handles just over 5,000 tonnes, Plunthisham 7,500 tonnes, and Witchford 7,300 tonnes. So the idea of the booking system will help us manage the throughput of those sites. There will be a certain amount of flexibility to try and accommodate that those are unable to book or haven't booked to allow them to get onto site, but would encourage everybody to be thoughtful on about how they approach the site and use it, and to be mindful of other residents who pre-booked, and if they have to wait a short period of time, we can get them accommodated. But the difficulty is going to decide exactly how much tonnage is going to go from Milton to which of the respective sites.
Thank you very much. Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Andrew and Emma. 2 points. One, very straightforward. Is the design at split level going to be in a similar, maybe larger version of what's been done at Wychford, which works so fantastically well? And the second point is, if we find during the construction period that the booking system isn't required, can we have the flexibility to remove it? Because I think it is a prohibitor to use. So I think that needs to be closely monitored. And the easiest way to monitor that is, as a couple of my colleagues opposite have mentioned, to measure the rise in fly tipping.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The split level design, similar to the Wychford site, won't be covered the same way Wychford is. Forgive me, I've forgotten the second part of your question. Oh, booking system, yeah. The booking system, yes, it can be flexible. However, there is a counter suggestion to that is, could the booking system be introduced to all 9 sites as a precursor to a future decision on whether it's suitable or not in the wider context of site usage at HRCs? And a point that was raised earlier about Suffolk and Norfolk, they are already moving towards booking systems at their respective household recycling centres. So we could see an influx of material coming in from the surrounding counties into our sites, which are currently sort of unsupervised in that manner and incur additional costs in disposal, etc.
If we can just ask Emma to make her point as well, and then you can come back on both together.
Yeah, so I think what I would say is when we first brought the booking system in historically, when we went into the COVID, we had a system where we were having to shut it down very early and we were ending up with some issues around some of the sites. Through that, we actually were able to advance the booking system. So actually what we would have and what we'd be looking to bring in would be a lot more advanced, and it wouldn't need to be closed down early in the same way. We are still looking at the flexibility of the sites, though, just to make sure we don't end up with a problem with your local residents being turned away. So I think it's just to say that we will make sure that we're widely engaging on the comms plan and making sure we've built in enough flexibility for those sites as well. What we don't want to see, though, is an issue whereby we've got queuing back onto the highway. So I think it's about getting that balance, but I'm sure that we can get that balance. I think is the reassurance I want to give you.
Yeah, I'm one of those people that actually lives closer to Mildenhall's recycling place. Although I live in Cambridgeshire, I live closer to Mildenhall than I do to Wychford. I go to Wychford because it's a better run and easier to use service because it's got the split level approach. And I can only stress how infinitely more safe that is to drop stuff into something that's at waist level or below than it is to climb up metal stairs in all kinds of open weather. I am concerned with something else that just was raised there. I'm sure this may be covered, but I can't recall reading it. Why no cover? Is it purely a cost matter that we're going ahead with this with no cover?
If I can come in, the site is actually in the Cambridge Greenbelt, and one of the things that had to be considered as part of the planning remit was how you can actually design something so it keeps the openness and it keeps that ability for the vision to be through. So when it went to a planning decision, it was essential that it was split level for very much the reasons that you've already given to make sure it has that accessibility. But it was also looking at ways of keeping the lighting to a minimum and keeping that openness. So part of it will have been through the elements of where that site is and the importance of the design of that site.
Very well, because it's you.
Thank you. You're so kind. I can't help feeling we've lost an opportunity to drive some power source to service the plant by not putting a roof on it. I think we've got a natural living roof on the one at Wychford, which would have hidden the roof from a distance. And surely in the capability of re-engineering the site, we could have gone down in the site. We could have actually put the come down in the site
therefore lowering it from the obscuring A14 viewers? Don't get that, actually. I don't get it.
I think, need to remind all of us that we are not the planning committee and that we can't revisit the decisions of the planning committee, nor indeed should we try. I'm going to bring in Councillor Bradnam as the local member to make a local observation.
Thank you. I just wanted to add into the mix. What are we assured that our staff or the staff working at the site will have employment during the temporary closure? I guess they're Thalia staff, or are they ours? I'm slightly bemused at the moment, but I'm just would hope that we weren't going to lose our staff during that time.
I thought it was going to be a comment on what we've just discussed, but never mind. Fresh subject, staffing.
No, thank you. Yeah, discussions with Thalia will involve, what we can do with the employee assets that they have. It'd be great if we can redeploy them to the alternative sites for the period of time that the site is closed. But that's a conversation that we're going to have with Thalia about what that would look like. But I would agree, it would be great if we could redeploy them, because otherwise we lose that knowledge and experience to other employers, and it'd be difficult to recruit and retrain quality staff.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Any other
them live locally.
questions? Any other questions? No? Councillor Coots.
Again, I'm afraid just to comment to reinforce what Councillor Goldsack said here. We love our site at Wychford. It is a pleasure to use. It's a real asset, and lovely to see something similar happening in Milton. And we do need to, as Councillor Goldsack and others have said, make sure we manage the transition. It's a very obvious point, but we're all aware of the queues that built up during COVID outside that site, and that it was very definitely unsatisfactory. Thank you.
Thank you. Any debate on the proposals in front of us? No? I'm not seeing any hands go up, so I'm going to move to the recommendations. The recommendations are A, to approve the preferred option to proceed with construction of the Milton Household Recycling Centre as set out in section 3 of the report. B, to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Environment and Green Investment Committee to award and execute a contract to the successful design and build contractor. And C, to approve the temporary closure of Milton HRC and the introduction of a booking system for the 3 nearest alternative HRCs for the management of additional traffic and tonnages while the Milton HRC is temporarily closed for construction. And I think this meeting has sent some messages back to the presenters today about some of the issues that need to be considered in how we implement that. But in terms of the principles here, the 3 recommendations in front of us, can I see those in favour, please? I think that is unanimous. I'm not seeing any other hands. So thank you very much indeed, members. Thank you very much, Andrew and Emma, for that report. Item 6 then is the Cambridgeshire Flood Mitigation Programme update. And this will be presented by Richard Whelan, Principal Officer Flood and Water, and supported by Hilary Tandy. Thank you very much indeed, both of you. So I'll let you settle into your seats, and then if you would like to take us through your report, please.
Okay, thank you. So we're here to provide an update on the flood mitigation programme for the county, as we'd agreed to previously. And we've got 4 recommendations in the report. But before going into those, just like to sort of provide a bit of an introduction as to where we are, where we've got to. So the background, very briefly, was a production of a local flood risk management strategy, which then prompted a number of locations as priority areas to investigate future schemes, future pieces of work. And as part of that, we've also then had a number of investigations following flooding since then as well. So those 2 have then fed into a programme of priority areas for us to look at. And those priority areas we've been able to take forward as a part of the Just Transition funding that we had previously. Now, the original business case was within the documents that were sent out and highlighted how we're going to break the programme down into 3 stages. So in the first stage, which we've just completed, was very much what information do we have? Where are our priority areas? Let's have a walk over those areas with the professional services that we had through the Highways Framework, and then meeting with partners, with communities to have a look at where the flooding hotspots were, and then look at what potential options there are in those locations. Now, off the back of that, we've got 18 locations with over 100 options that were potentially put forward. There was some initial cost benefit analysis of the very high level of the options that were proposed, which led to about 40 of those options being discounted. Now, a number of those options that have been discounted, there may be ways and means of doing something that's perhaps not solve the problem, but an improvement in the situation if we work in partnership with others. So we are exploring those options as well. Partners such as local flood groups and water companies and that kind of thing. And then within the second stage, we would look to have a look at the shortlisted options that we've got. I believe there was a shortlist list of shortlisted options within the appendices. And we're looking at the feasibility of those, drawing those up into a detailed design. And then within the third stage is very much delivery of schemes. So some of those will be quick wins, and those quick wins we'd like to be able to get on with straight away. Hence the reason why we're looking at, let's look at the feasibility of the larger schemes, and within the smaller schemes, we'll carry on with those as part of the programme. And that's was sort of described in the report. So the larger schemes would end up coming back for approvals, depending on the amounts and depending on what the thresholds are for those. And to give an idea on the types of schemes, there was a sort of a piece in the report that sort of sets out the types of bits of work that we're doing. So some of them may be simple remedial works to existing drainage systems. Some of them may be the need to improve the existing infrastructure. Some of them may be a need to introduce new infrastructure, in introducing landscape features upstream, or potentially building evidence for policy and building a programme for future where we've got a line of sight of funding from other partners, such as the Environment Agency. So whilst we've got a list of locations where we've already identified options, it's very much sort of is providing the note that we will try and retain flexibility in that. There will be other issues highlighted, and the work was completed in July, and obviously there's been flooding since, which has highlighted other areas where we can potentially do work. So we're adapting to what our partners are operating on, type of work they're looking at, how we can get involved in that and influence potentially outcomes on that, and also any new issues that arise. And that may, depending on the scale, may or may not be in other priority locations as well. And I think that's it as a very brief overview. So if anybody's got any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. I'm going to go to members for questions. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Hilary. I wanted to know the core data that was used to draw up this list of risk areas at 0.7.1 on your report, because I don't know what has caused flooding in those areas, but I know that between Landbeach and Waterbeach, there is an area of groundwater flooding. Of course, that's very difficult to control because it responds to the circumstances in the aquifer around it. But I have prepared reports and told the Leeds Local Flood Authority in the past about a collection of some 30 houses in Waterbeach Road, Land Beach, and along the Ely Road that suffered very severely when the groundwater levels were so high that the water level came up in their garden. So what the question was, what are the criteria? Is it internal property flooding, or is it some other criteria? Thank you.
Okay, so I should say the primary focus on us for the program was to look at surface water flooding as a general rule. That said, I think the more anyone investigates the flooding, the more you realise it doesn't really matter where the water comes from, and obviously you have higher river levels, you have groundwater levels, you may have it from a sewer. They all interact with each other. So there will be instances where we work with partners on where they're looking at sewer flooding, because the exceedance of the sewer flooding then causes issues as well. As a priority, we would typically looking at areas where we've carried out Section 19 investigations. Those get triggered, generally speaking, by internal flooding. So it's internal flooding of a number of properties. So there are locations where there has been internal flooding, which may or may not have been resolved as a part of remedial works through highways, through partnerships, looking at their partners looking at their infrastructure as well. But yes, it would typically be factored in by internal flooding as a first port of call. Access issues and sort of damage to private property are still considered, and it's certainly something that we can look at. I know some of the areas where the Environment Agency have flagged up ongoing issues, whether it be related to groundwater or main river level, and they're wanting to work with us. They have got their own actions within the flood risk management plan that we're more than willing to work with them on. As there's going to be some resolution in them looking at their issues and the impact it has on the local drainage network. So but as a general rule, it's internal flooding.
Thank you very much, Richard. Could I remind you, excuse me, Councillor Bradham,
sorry,
I'm speaking. Could I remind you please to switch your microphone off when you're not speaking, because then the microphone, the camera tracks to the person whose microphone is on. Councillor Bradham, you wanted to come back.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I wasn't sure you'd seen me. So the reason I raised that is because that particular problem in Land Beach was extremely severe around that notable time of Christmas 2020, January 2021. But that flooding issue in Land Beach and Waterbeach didn't go away until May. These people had completely filled back gardens, and some of them had problems with their sewage network as well, which were eventually dealt with by Anglian Water. But that whole area I'm sorry to see it's not been part of the action plan. Is there still an opportunity to feed into this? I feel as though I've almost missed the boat, even though I was in regular communication with the lead local flood authority at the time.
Okay, no, there's nothing that's ruled out as such, and those kind of future pieces of work, there's no reason why we can't look at them in partnership with others. I am conscious that from a lot of the work's been informed by the action plan that we had off the back of our local strategy, which is probably 2021, 22, I think we originally went through that. So a lot of it's off the back of that, and the issue that with regards to groundwater and the impact on sewage is something that we're looking at with Anglian Water as part of multi-agency groups with them. So there's a few multi-agency groups that Anglian Water are setting up as a part of a priority areas where services are affected. Most of that is groundwater, high groundwater tables getting into the sewerage system and impacting on the sewerage. So South Cambridgeshire is quite notably impacted by that. And some of the Fenland towns as well. Anywhere where there's an ability for the groundwater to come up and infiltrate is having a big impact. So we are working with others on that. There might not necessarily be work that we complete on our own, but there's no reason why we can't do that with partners.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard. Councillor Gardner, you had a question.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you very much, Richard and Hilary, for all the work that you do in my division, particularly in the Alconburys, which, as you well know. Oh, sorry. Sorry. Thank you, Richard and Hilary, for all your support in my division, particularly, which, as you well know, suffers greatly from flooding. And, you know, it is greatly appreciated by me and particularly the Alconbury Flood Group. My question is, when it comes to planning applications going forward and the local plan, particularly in regard to Huntingdonshire, which is going through its new local plan, will you be looking at those sites so that you can guide and put comments with regard to possible flooding issues, particularly on those sites that are within my division and within known flood areas? Will you be commenting on that? And will you, if they do subsequently get planning permission, will you be looking at how those planning applications and what works are required to mitigate flooding? Will you be then checking that that mitigation work is then undertaken? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gardner. So on the local plan sites for Huntingdonshire, we've submitted all our comments on the individual sites, and I know there were some in Alconbury. So the team engaged with officers in the rest of the team, so to make sure that those comments are taken in, and we've submitted them last week to HDC. On the planning application side, we do comment on the major applications, so those of 10 dwellings or more, which will continue to do so. But then in terms of the monitoring, whether what is approved is actually implemented, would fall to the local planning authority. But if we had any suspicion that something hadn't been implemented, then we would work with them and then engage, visit the site and work out what has and hasn't been built.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? Councillor Smith.
Thank you. Can I also say, yes, Hilary and her team, you do work very hard. Yes, I think everybody can appreciate that. Basically, can I just ask, there's a lot of groups being set up. I know you're attending a lot of them, but does anybody actually oversee all these groups so as gaps are not being sort of formed or whatever? Because Anglian Water, they're doing theirs. There's all the flood groups. Everybody's setting up a group. Oh, there's a lot of groups. Who's overseeing them? Or are they being? Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. No, we feel that as well. There's
Well, good. Everybody getting involved is good. I'm not saying it's not, but it's so, you know, before that gets sort of put about.
Yeah, no, that's fine. No, we as a team, we endeavour to keeping track of all those groups and just make sure that there's some kind of interlink between all the issues that are being raised, because if we go to some groups, it's quite clear that you have issues that we may know about with highways, or issues that have been flagged up with us, and issues that Anglian Water are also trying to deal with. And a lot of those, this is sort of perhaps is where we're looking at with the programme. If we tried to resolve those on our own, we'd probably struggle to get the cost benefit up to be able to carry out any works, and the cost of the works, the deliverability, there'd be so much that we'd be trying to do. Whereas getting involved in those groups, whilst sometimes it can feel like there's a lot of them, there's a lot going on, it gives you an indication of what everybody else's drivers are, and it gives you an idea of how we can get hold of funding, how we can achieve pieces of work in partnership. And so we try to get involved in as many of those as we can. You do quite often have a meeting with the same people that you may have had a meeting with before. So you then start to be able to rationalise some of those, which is quite useful. But yeah, it's probably going to be one of the key ways of being able to get work done in the future, is helping others deliver schemes that also provide benefits for us. So, yeah.
I think on that point, there are at least two different types of groups. There are the community flood groups, which were set up under the aegis of this authority and which are overseen and supported by this authority, including the provision of the annual conference. And I have to say that the second annual conference of the community flood groups was a massive increase in attendance over the first one, and showed how much that approach has developed and people have taken that up. The groups, the other groups, were very much an Anglian Water unilateral piece of work, and I'm not sure how well they are integrated overall into what we are doing. And I do think actually it might be useful if we could find some way of presenting some sort of map or graphical representation of where we have community flood groups and where there are Anglian Water groups as well. I don't necessarily think that everywhere ought to have a group. There are some areas whose flooding problems are fairly minimal and who can live very well without a group. There are others who clearly are less fortunate in that respect, and it would be very good to be able to see at a glance who's operating in that area and whether or not there are obvious places that we recognise as local members where there ought to be something going on and the community hasn't come together to develop it for itself, and Anglian Water has not included it in its group's project. So I think that might be helpful to everybody if that's something we can take away and think about. Councillor Bradnam would like to come back.
Thank you, Chair. As you said that, it reminded me that in my own village of Milton, I was thinking about the purpose of having flood groups. And part of the problem is that parish councils are not empowered to raise monies to address issues of flooding. And so part of the reason for having a flood group is because they are, whereas parish councils are not. So sometimes it's a collaborative effort between the flood group and the parish council. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Wood.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally understand. Thank you very much for the report, by the way. And I totally understand that internal flooding, going back to an earlier comment, should take priority. But I've got some feedback coming from somewhere for some reason, where that's coming from. But yeah, I totally understand where internal flooding should take priority. But where community areas are flooded, or private land is flooded and the landowner's income is affected, are those taken into account at all?
So there's a number of places where they're going to be harder to resolve. A few of those, there might be pieces of work that are resolved for our investigation function as opposed to our programme. As it's often one person affected by the performance of an asset on an adjacent landowner, for argument's sake, and then we sort of perhaps have to get involved as a mediation process. But there are a number of areas where, and this is sort of comes back to the why nothing is off the table. There's a number of areas where it's been highlighted more recently, I think, as a result of the weather of the last 4 years. The access and the impact of being able to have access could potentially have more of a risk to residents and to their safety than internal property flooding. In that you can potentially take measures to stop water getting in your house, or you can potentially make your house resilient to that. But if you're isolated in any way, if as a community or as a householder or whatnot, that can then have a potentially impact on the ability for emergency services to be able to get access, or it could have the one piece of work that we're involved with is something called the Future Fens, which is a collaboration with Anglian Water and the Environment Agency, and they're looking at the long-term, if you like, the long-term future of the fens, how the infrastructure is looked after, and those kind of aspects. And a lot of that is about valuing of agricultural land. which typically with funding pots that are available to us as flood risk industry don't generally take on consideration of those kind of things in any particularly great way. It's primarily, the funding is primarily triggered by properties. So it's quite hard to be able to seek funding to be able to resolve those kind of issues. But it doesn't mean we can't have a look at what the issues are and are there easier ways of resolving them without necessarily having to put something in place.
Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you. Thanks for the report and the progress being made. It's good to see. My point is maybe a more immediate one, and it's not local. It's anywhere. I have the fortune or misfortune, depending on your view, to drive an awful lot around the country, and it's extremely frustrating for the driver, and it's extremely frustrating for the residents in the locale when something like a flood defence piece of work is going on and their sat-nav has taken them to a road that's then closed. Can you ensure that work on these projects, and also where possible, when there's an emergency flood situation, is informed to Waze and Google and the way that people use sat-navs is communicated? Because you're compounding both an environmental issue by having cars turning around in a very close proximity, vehicles that is, not just cars. So that's upsetting the locals that are already under threat of the flood that they're having to deal with. I'm just, it's not really part of this report, but it's part of the actions of this report when the work starts. Can you make sure that process is in place, please, to inform the main satellite navigation providers there and then? There's ways and means to do it. You can do it on the sat navs themselves, but that would really be useful to both the residents and the users of the roads.
I know there's a number of pieces of telemetry and there's a number of flood warnings that affects the roads in and around Cambridgeshire, either getting in or out of Cambridgeshire or travelling within. So Erith, Whittlesea, up at Welney as well, where they're more regular. And there are set processes in place for managing the diversion routes, for putting up road closures and that kind of thing. And also I know there's some work going on with telemetry, both in terms of us having a look at it and also with highways. So as part of that, I'll certainly take that away, feed that back to them and see if there's any way of doing that. I know I know there is if you like, a process for the communications, but as you say, if you're a commuter travelling through an area, you won't necessarily have seen local communications. So yeah, I'll report that back and I'll see if there's anything we can do on that.
Thank you. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question I've actually asked at the planning committee at the district level as well, actually. But so I'm not sure whether it should come underneath this remit or not. But because obviously we're talking about a finite amount of money and a lot of work to do with it. But I've been asked by residents, certainly in my patch and where I live as well, which is slightly out of patch. But when a development's built, obviously we have the suds go in, it's all designed, and then we often find, I'm saying often, that's not really fair, but it does happen that it's perceived that they don't work. They're certainly it's not sufficient enough. I asked at the district level, where when this happens, where do we go with it? And never really given nobody can sort of answer the question. Certainly at that level. Is that something that potentially new developments at the tail end of development, can this fall under this remit?
Thank you. I think we'd probably have to differentiate between whether it's a perception that it doesn't work or whether it's actually not working. We have got a case in Cambridgeshire at the minute where the system isn't working. So we're working with the local planning authority on that and having it surveyed to gather the evidence to put back to the developer to explain exactly why it's not working and the implications of it not working. But I know there can be a perception often that something isn't working simply because the pond on that site may be full of water when older drainage systems aren't, or vice versa. And I think sometimes it might be just that they're working differently. But if they are not working, then speak to us and we can look what we can do to investigate.
Thank you very much. It's all the more frustrating, I think, where members raise those points at the planning application stage and are assured everything is all right and predict exactly what's going to happen, and then everything happens exactly as predicted. I think we're all victims of that. Are there any more questions before we move to debate? Not seeing any more questions. So anybody wish to debate this item? I think everybody's exhausted themselves, so knock yourselves out with that one. So shall we move to the recommendations in that case, which are to note the progress made in relation to the Cambridgeshire Flood Risk Programme as set out in paragraph 3.1.1 of this report, and the planned work for stages 2 and 3 of the programme set out in paragraph 3.2.1. To approve the recommended option to progress the proposed projects to stages 2 and 3 of the Cambridgeshire Flood Risk Programme based on the findings of the stage 1 work. To note that the medium and large schemes defined in paragraph 3.6.4 of this report would come back to the Environment and Green Investment Committee for approval before any stage 3 project is commenced. And finally, to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Place and Sustainability in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of Environment and Green Investment Committee to authorise the delivery of small schemes as defined at 3.6.3 in the programme, including the procurement, award and execution of any contracts in relation to these projects. Can I see those in favour, please, of those recommendations? Once again, that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed, members, and thank you, Richard and Hilary. So we're on to item 7 now, which is the corporate performance report. I need to remind you that Appendix 2 to the report is exempt, and if you wish to discuss or question that, we would need to move into exempt session. Can I ask whether any member is going to want to ask questions or debate anything in the confidential appendix? No? Thank you, that's extremely helpful. So the corporate performance report will be presented by our Executive Director of Place and Sustainability, Frank Jordan.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So I'm just going to cover 3 parts of the report in terms of the introduction. I'm going to cover the current performance, then just outline the revised performance framework that was agreed by the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee and what that means for the strategic indicators that will be reviewed in the future, and then an update on the risk part of the report. So the first part relates to the performance for the period up to September, so that's Q2 for 24-25, and the full indicators are provided in Appendix 1. And what you'll see in terms of Appendix 1 is that in terms of the basket of indicators, first of all, we've got good performance in relation to digital connectivity, where we're exceeding the target around gigabit connections, and we're not quite on target, but very close to the target on the super fast broadband target. So our current performance at the end of Q2 was 98.3% against a target of 99%. So I think good performance around connectivity. You see that in terms of the planning measure, which is around the county matters, 100% performance in terms of getting determination within agreed timeframes. We aren't able to, for this committee, be able to provide an updated set of indicators in relation to waste, however. That's owing just to the timeframes in terms of getting the data verified, particularly by the district council. So that will be available the next time the committee reviews performance. And then the final basket relates to carbon, and this committee got a very detailed report in relation to the annual carbon footprint, but the indicators nonetheless remind the committee of the good progress that's been made by the authority, particularly around scopes 1 and 2, with scope 1 being on target to achieve the ambition to be by 2030 to be net zero. But it also highlights the challenge that we discussed at the committee around scope 3 being a far more ambitious and more difficult target to achieve, particularly in relation to carbon from construction and the rural estate. So what section 4 outlines is, as I said in the introduction, the Strategy, Resources and Performance Committee in October agreed a revised performance framework, and each committee will be therefore presented with strategic indicators, which are outlined at section 4.6. And I think the key thing there is that most of those strategic indicators are really what the committee's been receiving to date. So it's not a significant change, but it's just to highlight that the revised performance framework will start to be reported the next time this type of report comes to committee. But it also outlines at 4.7 that there are 2 indicators that are still being developed. Once we've got the strategies finalised, we'll confirm the indicators in relation to biodiversity and woodland cover. So that's just a summary of the proposed strategic indicators. And then what the report now does as well is integrates risk into performance review. And also at the same time, the committee also reviews the financial monitoring information. So you're getting together at the same time risk, performance and finance as a committee to review. Particular risks that we highlight in the report. First of all, we've got high risk in relation to finance for the whole directorate. Obviously, this committee oversees a significant proportion of the directorate's budgets. A particular issue why we've highlighted it as a red risk is because the current financial information that will be presented at the next item, where the directorate is overspending, particularly in relation to waste and the delay in securing the income around energy. But we're based on the performance this year and understanding of that risk, we're building in further safeguards and a further analysis to make sure next year's business plan that's being proposed has robust estimates in there. So that's a particular area that we have in terms of putting further control in, and we are mitigating the overspend as much as possible as a directorate. The second key risk that we're highlighting is health and safety. So we're not particularly saying that health and safety isn't being managed, but given the importance of health and safety, we've just highlighted it as a risk because of the potential impact if you have a major health and safety incident. And as a management team, we're wanting to make sure we undertake further assurance to make sure that we can provide that absolute assurance that health and safety is embedded into all of our operations. So that's a particular area where I would highlight as a risk. But until we get that further detailed assurance, we wouldn't want to downgrade that risk. I think the other reason for putting it as a high risk, it reminds all officers that the importance of having day-to-day health and safety management in their regimes and in their meetings. And then the final high rated risk is in relation to waste, and particularly the waste strategy review. And the particular reason being is that until we get a decision around the future waste strategy, that will have significant issues for the authority, particularly around the financial position, but also it is a significant matter that does need to be resolved. Nonetheless, we have got a report coming to a confidential meeting this afternoon that provides an update on that, and we are aiming to get a final recommendation as soon as possible in the spring to be able to bring that matter to conclusion. So that's a particular area that we've also highlighted as a high risk that's being actively managed. The other thing that we would highlight, though, is that there is a risk that we've have reduced quite significantly, which related to the sustainable drainage systems, because there was a potential additional responsibility coming to the authority in the management of those systems and regularising those. The latest information we have from government is that they're not currently intending that burden to be passed to local authorities. It may come to local authorities in the future. The reason why we highlighted it as a risk because it was suggested it would be coming to us as an additional responsibility, which would put extra demand in terms of our resources, and we weren't sure if it was going to be fully funded. So the reason why we've downrated it is because we don't, at this point in time, believe it is going to be passed over to us imminently. So I think that summarises it, Chair, in terms of, as I said, it's the update on the performance, a summary of the key risks, and then just for the committee to note how the revised performance framework will be reported in the future. So I'll hand back to you, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Frank. We also have Stephen Howarth with us for these items. Does anybody have any questions on the report or on what Frank has said? Councillor Hathorn.
Looking at the first bit, we seem to be recovering more in waste. So some of this is comment and some of this is question, sorry. Recovering more in waste, that's good. And the recycling centres are recycling a lot, so that's excellent. Waste, the amount of household waste per head seems to have stabilised. Do we know anything? Have we got any explanation of that? That seems like a good, sensible place to be. Perhaps we could be good to reduce, but is there a comment on that? The energy usage, having this as a single line, which incorporates electricity, gas, and oil, makes it quite difficult to have a handle on what's going on. So I see that from the commentary that electricity usage has gone up slightly, but gas has reduced. So the reduction in gas is quite a good thing to see, but it's difficult to pull out from the data or from the graph. And the electricity, if it's renewable, then I think we can understand that you will probably use a bit more electricity if you're using less gas. And if the electricity is renewable, then it's a greener source of energy. It would be helpful to consider whether we could see that breakdown more clearly in future. And finally, the access to superfast broadband. We're going the right way. That's great. Getting access to superfast broadband is a thing I support and think is good. However, I think that the access is one thing. As long as you have access, it doesn't matter. There's a monopoly provider. And certainly I see complaints all the time that in my community, the cost of access to superfast broadband goes up and up and up. Do we have any handle on what the actual usage, the uptake of this superfast broadband is? That's it. Thank you. Sorry.
So I'll take those in reverse order, and Emma Fitch at the back might be able to assist on the waste. But I would just highlight on the waste, as I said, the information in here is for quarter 1. We haven't yet got quarter 2's information. So on the superfast broadband, the thing, as well as doing the connectivity part, the Connecting Cambridgeshire team is also trying to make sure that we do support communities and individuals to be able to actually take advantage of the connectivity. And in some instances, we are able to access vouchers that applies to both businesses and households. So there's some support there. And we've also got a digital inclusion program as well. So we're trying to do as much as possible to support individuals. But in terms of the market dynamics, we have limited influence in that regard. So that's the first thing I would say. On the energy, so I think the broad reason why electricity will be going up and gas is going down is because the decarbonisation programme, where we are shifting away from gas and using things like air source heat pumps, which uses electricity. And as you've outlined, Councillor Haythorne, when we do use electricity, we use 100% renewable energy. So that helps with the carbon footprint. But I think if it's helpful, we can show that breakdown so we can see that decarbonisation programme is actually doing what we said it was going to be doing. But then there's still further review of the estate, as you know, within your committee, as that you chair, a further review of the estate, because the next thing we really want to make sure is we get to the estate to the smallest possible size so that we can optimise the estate, and that will also have an impact on total energy consumption as well. And the other part of energy relates to street lighting, and we have got a programme going forward to replace the street lights with LED lighting, so that will reduce electricity use as well. So, Emma, is there anything particularly on the waste side in terms of the waste per head stabilising, noting it's a quarter 1 position?
Absolutely. So just to build on what you've said, really. So first of all, we haven't got that additional information. But the other thing is it actually is very slightly decreasing over time, but it isn't smooth. And some of that is owing to the green waste changes from year to year as well. So we are monitoring that, particularly with the new developments, because actually the increased recycling of some will be impacting on some of those figures. But you're right, overall, it looks like it's pretty stable. So once we've got the new figures in from the districts, we can just make sure that's looking like it's maintained.
Thank you. Councillor Goldsack, then Councillor Gowing, then Councillor Bradnam, please.
Thank you. If I can bring your attention to indicator 226. I think we've got to be clear here. It says to me the change in performance is declining. That's ascending if I look at that. I think we're playing with words here. We've gone back to 2018, and I agree it's come down dramatically since then. But there's no doubt that since 2021-22, that is climbing. Therefore, the change in performance shouldn't be declining. It should be ascending.
So if I understand the question, Councillor Goldsack, so I think scope 3 emissions are increasing and are projected to increase, and that's a bad thing. That's something we're trying to reduce, so the performance is declining. So the emissions are going up, but the performance is going down. Is that's the way it's presented? Is that, have I understood that correctly, Councillor Goldsack, on 226?
I thought I'd simply read it. Maybe I've missed something. I don't know. But what it says there was that if you look at the target, that 50.4%, 50.4 reduction from 2018 levels by 2030, that's the target. The direction for improvement is going down, which what you're saying is that's a positive. Are we looking at a double negative? Have I misread it? But I'm looking at the graph. The bar graph itself tells me that there are. I think I'm reading that to say that there are more carbon than less.
We're talking about the scope 3, 226.
We are, yeah.
Right. Okay. If I can try to be helpful, the direction for improvement is down. So if the bars are going down, that shows it's an improvement. However, the bars are going up in the most recent years, and therefore that is why performance is declining. Because if this was a good bar chart and one we were happy with, we would see those bars decreasing. And that is the direction of what good looks like. The direction of improvement is to go down. In fact, what's happening is they're going up, and
Okay,
that means we're
I
declining.
I understand that rationale, but if I just challenge that, then are we right then to measure this from 2018 to 2024 and not just look at the last couple of years, because then that arrow would be going upwards?
I think there's an ongoing historic information point to this. We don't just want to see the most recent few years. We want to see as a whole how our performance is going. 2018 will have been the year in which we started. I'm thinking that's because we will have set that target around that time. So we are wanting to see, and remembering also what Cheryl French told us in a previous meeting, I think, which is that the amount of space below the trajectory, below the line that we're following, is important, because you can reach that target several different ways. You can flatline at the beginning and then have dramatic improvement in later years, but the total carbon that you will have emitted under that pattern will look very different than if you started very early and reached your target just almost ahead of time, as it were. So the shape of what's underneath the trajectory is really important, but also the whole picture is important, and the whole picture goes back to the point at which we said we were going to make that our target. So I think we do need to keep an eye on that, not just look at the last few years, because things fluctuate as well for a variety of different reasons. And of course, we will have had COVID, which played a huge part. And so that looked artificial at that stage to an extent. There are lots of factors in this. This isn't just, oh, the bars are up or down. This is about factors going back over time, and a lot of information goes into this.
I see that, and I hear everything you say, and I'm not disagreeing with that. The representation on here tells me the change in performance is declining. I read that as good, but it's not. What you're saying is that's actually bad, right? So the direction for improvement is going down. That's good. You can see my confusion. So if I'm confused and we look at these, by the way, the presentation on these is infinitely better than it used to be. So I will say that. But you can see my confusion on this one in particular.
It is difficult when you are trying to represent a number of different factors, and I appreciate that. Councillor Bradnam.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to observe, I understand Councillor Goldsack's perplexity, if you like. But the point is that from 2018, although in the last 3 years it has gone up, actually it is lower than it was in 2018, 2019 and 2019, 2020. So the direction for improvement is down, correct? And we are actually declining, although it looks like we've gone up in the last few years, but we are declining. The trick will be to make sure that we stay below the line. Councillor Dupre, the chair is right. The critical point is the volume under that line, because that depicts in a broad pictorial way the amount of carbon that is we're emitting. And so the quicker that we can decline on that line, the most is the better, you know. But fun and games, and you're right, these depictions on this register are infinitely better than they were before. So thank you very much to the officers who've gone to the trouble of preparing them and the narrative alongside.
Try to bottom this out, Councillor Goldsack. Is your problem with the word declining?
I think the way the graph is presented is misleading, right? You've had to explain it to me, somebody who, I won't say lives and breathes these, but is familiar with them. I'm just asking officers, you know, take the positive that we're heading in the right direction, etc., etc. And if we are, say it. If we aren't, change it. The arrow and the declining in this particular 226 indicator are misleading as to the actual current performance. And I take everything on board that you've said about the under the graph. And I remember the Cheryl French conversation from the previous meeting, which I was always also subbing at.
Let's be clear. The arrow is not intended to represent current performance. There are some graphs where bar charts going up is a good thing. We're doing more of something and it's a good thing. There are some bar charts where going down is a good thing, emitting carbon. The arrow is intended to show not the current performance, but whether in this graph, a bar chart going up is a good or a bad thing. And what that arrow shows is that what we want to see is those bars going down. That's why the arrow is there, to show what the thing is trying to convey. The change in performance is where we talk about whether things are getting better or worse, actually, in reality.
I think that so demonstrates my point. You've had to explain it again and again and again. We are leaving this. Other people look at this, so there'll be other environmental groups that'll be watching this to see how we're doing. Right? I just don't want it misleading. So if we can, I'm just asking officers. I think Frank's nodding. So if we can just have a look at it again, and you know, this was questions to the officers, and thank you very much to two members for trying to explain it to me. But I think it's down to Frank and his team to make it as clear and as as clear as we possibly can. I didn't think it was going to be this bigger issue, so I apologise.
I'm struggling to see how it could be made more clear, but I'm sure that if it can be, there are no two better people in the world to make that happen than Frank and Emma. Councillor Hathorn and then Councillor Wood.
Sorry, can I add? Yes, I see the confusion. It feels as though it'd be helpful if our performance is declining because we are reducing less fast. This is the difficulty: reducing, reduction, going down, declining. They're all very similar. Not having a RAG rating. If there was a RAG rating next to declining, it feels as though it would sort of, you know, if there was a colour that would communicate what's going on more clearly.
Okay, and Councillor Wood, you were going to, is it on this subject?
It is, yes.
Right, because I have still got hovering two other speakers who indicated about something completely different, and I don't want to forget them. Councillor Wood, on this point.
I understand entirely what's being discussed here. I believe if we were to change that information to show the present trend, it then wouldn't indicate the direction from the start. So either way, there's going to be slight confusion. What I might suggest is that we show it as being an improvement from the start, as it is presently, but we also add, perhaps to satisfy the need, include an element of present trend. So present trend is at the moment going up, but we are declining over the period concerned. And maybe that would satisfy both sides.
That raises a whole other nest of worms about whether the trend is up is good or bad, and whether declining is good or bad. But I'm sure we can fix it. I'm sure we can fix it. Perhaps we need a subcommittee to fix this. I do hope I'm joking. So therefore, we are going now to Councillor Gowing, who very patiently is waiting since he asked us to say something quite some time ago.
Yeah, let's hope mine is less complicated. It refers to indicator 150B, and I see that Fenland is. Oh, yeah, mine refers to indicator 150B, and Fenland is obviously bottom of the pile again because of the compost. Is it possible to isolate from that and have the recycling element?
Frank, any thoughts?
That's been previously requested. I think that we are able to provide the breakdown between recycling, reuse and composting, so we can provide the detailed breakdown on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is there used to be Get It Sorted volunteers, which I was one. But I think the person who ran that has left, and I don't think there's been a replacement. I used to go to various organizations and talk about recycling, which obviously helped. I was then, we'd go out and police the recycling ahead of the cart. And several were declined because of it wasn't all recyclable in the bins. So it'd be useful if I could have a breakdown and see the trend, see whether the trend of recycling has gone down since this initiative was stopped. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And Councillor Bradnam, you indicated to speak after Councillor Gowing.
Yes, I just wanted to understand, recycling itself is a separate line on this graph, isn't it? Is it that Councillor Gowing is asking for per district?
Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Is there anything further to be said on this item? Bearing in mind that we are being asked simply to note and review rather than to make any decision, and it seems to me to have been the most tortuous discussion we've had so far. Are we happy to say that we have noted and reviewed? Are we all agreed on that? Don't need to take a vote on that, do I? Thank you very much indeed. That wasn't quite the section that I'd expected. So we move on to finance monitoring, which will also be presented by Frank Jordan. And as I said, Stephen Howarth is here to assist. So thank you very much, Frank.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this provides the financial monitoring report for place and sustainability. But also I'll just highlight from the report the key elements that relate to Environment and Green Investment Committee. So you'll see overall the Directorate has an overspend position of 1.9 million as of the October position. The key issues in relation to Environment and Green Investment that are driving the overspend, first of all, relates to energy projects, and that relates to assumptions around timeframes for those energy projects to be completed and to be generating electricity that would then be sold and then create an income stream for the council. What I am able to provide an update on is particularly the most significant one of those projects was the North Angle Solar Farm, which is now fully connected and is now exporting to the grid and is now starting to create income for the council. So that income, first of all, is not factored into this year's budget assumptions so far. And based on that, we'll obviously be able to provide more assurance around the delivery of income from this period onwards. The second issues around the energy projects relates to St Ives and Braverham, which are still on site, but they're on track for completion by the end of the financial year. So I would envisage for the start of next year, we'll be able to have a much more robust position around the income projections for the energy projects. The second key issue, again, it's been highlighted in the risk report, relates to waste. So I think the committee is well aware of the additional costs relating to waste around waste disposal. There has been a reduction in this period because we've transferred allocations from a waste reserve that we had set up. So that has contributed to the cost of additional waste disposal, but there's still nonetheless an overspend, particularly because we're securing additional resources to help us with the waste strategy, which I referred to previously. And then on capital, in particular for environment and green investment, we're not forecasting any overspends or slippage, but I would just highlight, as I've said, the energy projects are still on site. So until they're completed, we wouldn't be able to confirm the final position, but we're not projecting any significant variances at this stage as far as the committee is concerned. Stephen, sorry, Stephen, was there anything you'd want to add?
No, thank you, Chair. That was Frank, that was a very comprehensive introduction, I think.
Thank you very much indeed, both. Are there any questions for Frank or Stephen? Councillor Hathorn?
St Ives and Badeborough are on track for the end of the year. How on track? Very, very on track. How certain are we?
So given where it is in terms of the project, it's really in the final stages. So we are on track for March. So yeah, so we have had further updates from the contractor pinning down on the final stages. So we are expecting to have that fully connected and exporting by March. So I know there's been delays up until now, but given where we're at, given that there's so little left to do, that's why we're able to say with that confidence that now in terms of the March. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? Any debate? Councillor Goldsack.
Thank you. Probably no surprise, I'm going to talk about the position of almost £4.5 million underperformance in our energy projects against the forecast project plans that we'll put in. I genuinely believe we have a major issue in this authority at the efficiency and ability to run projects. I think this is showing it. It's not a one-off. Yes, there are circumstances within this, the increase in costs of materials at the tail end and during COVID. I do accept that, and the bounces in inflations. We are here as representatives of our area, and I would like to focus inwardly here and ask the officers concerned that, I think it's time that we're coming towards the end of these major projects, okay, all late, all over budget, okay, and the quality, I mean, if you want to drill down into any of them, some are very good, some are not. I have real concerns about the ability of this authority to run these projects, and we've got to improve in this matter. Let me just put this into perspective. It's almost, well, it's 44.79% of the budget that we could have spent on increasing the damage done to peat damaged roads throughout our county. 4.479 as opposed to the 10 million we allocated. This money's got to come from somewhere, and we've got to get a better grip of this.
Respond to that. So thank you for the points, Councillor Goldsack. So these projects were commissioned quite some time ago, and there's obviously been quite a number of significant changes that we made within the directorate that manages these projects. So, and there has been a full lessons learned review been undertaken, so that is available, and that has been referenced to the audit and accounts committee, so that there is a full review of the projects. But in terms of where we currently sit, so the team that are currently managing these projects started probably around 18 months ago, and I would say they have got a very, very good grip on these projects. And the key issues related to these projects were two things: was first of all, the way that they were initially commissioned, and the second was putting the forecasts into the budget was the key issue, which are key lessons learned for going forward on these projects. We have got a revised structure in place where all complex projects are now managed by the head of complex infrastructure within the project delivery and infrastructure team. And if you look across the broad range of projects that they're delivering for this year, the current forecast, and it is a current forecast, so we'll obviously review it later on in the year, but we're on track for delivering the capital programme with a variance being under 10% at the moment across the whole capital programme. So I think what I would say is that there has been a full lessons learned review being undertaken. Those lessons have been applied, and I would give assurance that this authority and the Centre Directorate is able to manage projects like this. However, the other thing I would highlight is that based on the lessons learned from this project, I think we'll be carefully reviewing whether we would commission these types of projects in this way in the future, or whether we might take a different approach where we might have a different procurement model, or a different approach where we might enable energy projects in a different way, such as what we've just considered earlier today around community energy action plan to support communities to deliver the projects rather than us doing them directly ourselves. So I think there's a number of assurances I can provide there. Thank you, Councillor Goldstaff.
Thank you, Frank. That is absolutely right. And I've been hugely impressed by the way the team involved in these projects have come on in leaps and bounds in the last few years. It's been really good to see. And we have a much better grip, I think, as a result now than we had when we took these projects on. Councillor Gay.
Yeah, in response to Mark's point, I think we need to be clear that these historic projects which are now completed have learnt us many lessons, but at the moment we don't have any further projects, energy projects in the pipeline. So we've looked at the community energy plan. It looks like this is a very strong direction of travel for the future, but given where we are in the electoral cycle, the commitment of this authority to new energy projects is going to be up to the next administration, most likely. So to another point, really to Frank, the graph that you've got of forecast outturn variances for 2024 to 2025, we're seeing now a 2 million overspend. How are we going to get to a balanced position from there?
I would say getting to a fully balanced position, given the issues that we've got in terms of overspending in the directorate, would be highly optimistic given where we're at in the financial year. But first of all, you'll see that there is quite significant mitigation against the overspend through income in other parts of the directorate that don't report to this committee. We are doing, as all directorates are doing, is doing enhanced controls there. So all workforce requests, all third-party expenditure is reviewed. However, there is very little room for manoeuvre in this directorate because we have a significant number of income-based budgets. So we're trying to make sure we get as much income as secured, but you wouldn't reduce expenditure in those areas because that would reduce your amount of income. We have a number of fixed contracts where it's very difficult to reduce the third-party spends, particularly the PFI contracts that we've got. But notwithstanding that, we will do as much as we possibly can to mitigate this. But I think for the committee, I think I need to be clear. I think it's unlikely we'll get to a net nil position. I think what I would highlight, though, is we're trying to do as much as possible to make sure we've got a robust estimate going into the business plan so that we've got a solid base budget from next year onwards. So doing as much as we possibly can to mitigate that overspend, as I've outlined there, Councillor Gay.
Thank you. I revert back to Councillor Bradnam, who indicated a little while ago, and then Councillor Hathorn.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely recognise the importance of working within a budget, but I just wanted to take myself back. When I was first elected as a county councillor in 2017, we were alerted to the concerns about energy sufficiency, and I remember Cheryl French delivering seminar training to us, talking about the need to support the energy grid, which needed to then support the delivery of all the development around Cambridge to provide resilience, greater resilience in terms of electrical supply. And I remember her opening our eyes to the need to do our very best, to do groundbreaking visionary projects, to see how we could support our energy network. And as a result, we have North Angle Farm, we've got St Ives, the Smart Energy Grid project. We have solar panels on the Babraham Park and Ride. We have solar array on our own car park here. And nobody said this was going to be easy. It has been difficult. We've had all the problems with connectivity, the final connection of the private wire. We know it's been difficult. We've also looked at projects at Swaffham Prior to put a whole community onto a more sustainable energy supply. And we've learned from it. We've got our own solar farms. This hasn't been easy, and I'm not one who spends money easily, but what I just wanted to recognise was the task that we as members way back then gave Cheryl French and Chris Parkin at the time, that they were undertaking to do the research to find out whether these projects to work. We recognised they were groundbreaking. And so what I just wanted to acknowledge is that, yes, some mistakes have been costly. Some were things that we could not have done anything about. Yes, of course, it's impossible. It's important to learn from how these projects panned out in government funding and legislative framework. But I wanted to take this opportunity to thank Cheryl French and Chris Parkin and all the team for the work that they have done in trying to bring these really difficult, groundbreaking projects to fruition. Absolutely, we need to sort out the financial side of it and learn from them, but I just wanted to use this opportunity to thank that team for the work that they have done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. Councillor Hathorn next.
Yes, and I'd like to follow on from Councillor Bradnam. I absolutely support what she says, and I agree. I think it is really important that we have delivered groundbreaking projects, but I am suspecting that there was a failure to recognise the full level of complexity of the projects when they were commissioned by the previous administration, and that I've already seen it. We have a greater handle on optimism bias and a more realistic approach to how we manage projects going forward. I guess there's a question there. And is this something that Fran could recognise is a change that's taken place within the council, that we are more realistic about projects that are approached?
Well, I think we do a review on every single project now in terms of risks, the level of optimism bias, and we do gateway reviews. So certain projects won't get through to the next stage. So, for example, if you need to acquire land, if you need to secure third-party approvals, we need to make sure we've got assurance around those matters. I think some of the lessons we've learned around previous approaches is that those issues haven't been factored into either capital programming or capital management, which is now in place. But it's something we constantly review, because the other risk is sometimes that we put too much risk allowance in, and then we've got almost too much borrowing going into our capital budget. So we've got to get the balance right between how we manage risk and account for it. Thank you, Councillor Haythorne.
Councillor Goldsack.
Yeah, just going to come back to Councillor Hathorn's point. You're absolutely right, Councillor Hathorn. All of these projects, every single one of those, have started on the previous administration, because we were inventive. We thought of things, we looked at ideas, and we pushed the boundaries, and we engaged Cheryl and her team to go and find ways of making these work. It's what's happened in the last 4 years is the problem. You've said yourself, one of your colleagues just said, you've got no new schemes. How can we have no new schemes in an environment world with everything changing? I couldn't sit still and just take what was a slur there. It's not. The goodness of these projects came from the previous administration. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Councillor Goldsack. I think it might be really instructive for you to read the lessons learned report, because the picture presented in that is absolutely, completely and utterly the opposite. We inherited projects with very little understanding in the setup of the risks involved. We inherited poor management of really complex processes at the highest level within the authority. And I'm not I'm not blaming people who seized an opportunity, who ran with it, but there weren't the structures in place to run projects like this in the way that we ran other projects, and that wasn't happening. There were assumptions put into the budget, and the financial issues, setting aside Brexit, COVID, war in Ukraine, etc., one of the biggest financial issues was putting in projected income when there hadn't been a completion of the necessary work to assemble permissions on parcels of land. Basic things like that had not been done. There is a huge amount of information in the lessons learned report, and I really recommend it to people because that is something that I really want to guide this council in the way forward. It picks up a lot of issues about the complexity and the risk and the financial preparation of these projects in those early years following inception. As I said earlier, this council has commissioned that report, has received that report, and I think that at many levels we have understood a lot. I think I am personally very relaxed that we don't have a pipeline of further such projects yet. Firstly, because I think it was important to learn the lessons from the previous projects. But secondly, also because at a national level, the framework, the environment around such projects has changed enormously. There is now a government which is going to be banging through very large solar farms, very large national strategic infrastructure projects at a very fast rate. That is different to what we had before. We have understood the complexity of getting engaged in complex projects, particularly those which are dependent on each other. And we also have, I think, a new and very important route to progress. Well, not entirely new, because we are already engaged in things around community energy. We've got the Gamlingay Community Wind Turbine. We've got the Reach Solar Farm. We've got examples of good community energy schemes we are seeing growing up across the county. Groups like East Cambs Can, and people, community members with a genuine interest in climate and keen to do something about clean energy. And they are a real resource for us to lean on, I think, in this. And I very much hope that a focus on community energy, as well as all the local area energy planning and everything else that we are engaged in, will bear fruit. But also, A, take the community with us, and B, be significantly less risky than the projects that were embarked on in 2016, 2017, without that adequate understanding, as the lessons learned report clearly shows. Are there any other speakers on this? Not seeing any. Have we all said everything that we want to say on this before it goes to a vote? I'm going to move to the vote, which is that we are recommended to review and comment on the report. I think we've done that. Are we satisfied that we have done that? Thank you very much, everyone. Item 9 is the committee agenda plan, training plan, appointments to outside bodies and internal advisory groups and panels, and the appointment of member champions. Would the Democratic Services Officer please update us on any changes to the published report? Thank you, Jenna.
There are no updates to report at this time.
Thank you. In that case, can we note the agenda plan? Thank you very much indeed. And members, that is the final item on today's agenda. Our next meeting is on the 16th of January 2025 at 10 a.m. And I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you.